The night of December 15, as the rest of the world slept, a seismic realignment in West African geopolitics took place quietly. At 11:47 p.m., Ghana's President Wame Asante was shaken awake by an encrypted message on his phone. It was brief but monumental. Operation Baobab Tree begins now. Are you prepared to rewrite history? In Mali, President Assimi Goïta was already awake, scanning documents that would soon set shockwaves running around the globe. In Niger, President Mohamed Bazoum had summoned his most senior officials to an emergency session. In the region, 7 African nations were preparing a coordinated move that would rewrite the continent's future, and no one outside their inner circle suspected a thing. 3 months earlier, a low-profile but historic gathering had taken place in a tiny conference room in a Burkina Faso government complex in the capital city of Ouagadougou. Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's young revolutionary president, sat across from 6 African presidents. The meeting was so secretive that even their own intelligence services did not know it was happening. "Gentlemen," Traoré began, his tone calm but resolute, "for 60 years we've operated under foreign systems, using their currencies, their banks, their rules. And what has it given us? Poverty on the richest continent on earth." The room fell into silence. These leaders weren't career politicians. They were men who had watched their nation's resources exploited, their economies restrained, and their people kept poor, while foreign corporations prospered from African soil. Malian President Goïta leaned forward and asked, "So, what are you proposing?" Traoré stood up and gestured to a large map of Africa on the wall. "I propose we stop asking for permission to set our own destiny. We need our own monetary community, our own development bank, and our own commercial unions. Let's show the world what Africa can accomplish by itself." President Macky Sall of Senegal raised a concern. "The French will never allow it. The Americans will impose sanctions. The Chinese may pull their investments." "Let them try," Traoré responded with a slight smile. "By the time they realize what we've done, it will be too late to stop us." For the following 3 months, the 7 leaders worked under absolute secrecy in code Operation Baobab Tree, named after the resilient African tree that withstands drought, fire, and harsh weather conditions. They sought to forge an unbeatable bond. Preparations continued sotto voce. Central bank governors were informed sotto voce. Military commanders were informed. Trade ministers began drafting new sovereign agreements. Above all, the nations began accumulating gold, outside Western financial systems. Meanwhile, in Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron hosted African ambassadors to a diplomatic dinner. "Our partnership with Africa has never been stronger," he stated. "France is committed to walking alongside Africa in its development." Little did he know that some of the very nations sitting around his dinner table were about to unleash the largest economic shock since the Bretton Woods Agreement. At 6 a.m. on December 15, Burkina Faso made the first public announcement. President Traoré went on TV with a historic announcement. "Starting today, Burkina Faso is withdrawing from the West African Economic and Monetary Union. We will no longer be employing the CFA franc. Today, our new gold-based currency enters circulation." By 8 a.m., Mali had copied them. President Goïta's speech was even blunter. "Mali regains full monetary sovereignty. Our money will serve our people, not foreign institutions." In London, currency traders became frantic. The CFA franc, shared by 14 African countries and backed by the French Treasury, started to swing wildly. Phone lines buzzed between Paris, Washington, and Brussels. By midday, Niger joined in. President Bazoum's address boomed across the Francophone world. "Today, Niger chooses pride over dependency. We side with our brothers in creating an Africa for Africans first." Europe reacted quickly. The European Union held an emergency meeting. French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna said, "This is a frontal threat to regional stability. We cannot allow this precedent to hold." But it was already too late. The African countries had moved swiftly, discreetly, and with precision. When the world powers finally acted, the stage had already been set for a new economic order. Operation Baobab Tree was not just the most reckless economic transformation in contemporary African history, but also a declaration of sovereignty, unification, and independence. For the first time in decades, the destiny of millions wasn't being dictated in Paris, London, or Washington, but in Accra, Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou. Africa had awakened. Even as the world tried to contain it, the tide of Operation Baobab tree was already unstoppable. By 3 p.m., Guinea made public its withdrawal from all French-dominated monetary arrangements. By 5 p.m., Chad, one of France's most intricate and strategically aligned allies, shocked everyone by aligning itself with the movement. Senegal, France's longest-standing African ally, delivered what was seen across the continent as the most crippling blow at 7 p.m. The words of President Macky Sall rang out. For 60 years, Senegal has been France's best friend. Today, we choose to be loyal to Africa instead. Ghana added its voice to the growing union at 9 p.m., becoming the seventh nation. President Nana Akufo-Addo's words were tempered but resolute. Ghana led Africa to political independence in 1957. Today, we lead Africa to economic independence. Concurrently in Washington, the United States National Security Council convened an emergency session. CIA Director William Burns delivered a serious briefing. Mr. President, we are witnessing the potential collapse of Western influence in West Africa. 7 nations, accounting for approximately 60% of the region's GDP, essentially declared economic independence. President Joe Biden requested options. The response was unambiguous. Limited, sir. These nations have been preparing for months. They've stockpiled gold reserves, created off-grid financial infrastructure, and regionalized military alliances. Any straight-up intervention would be costly and most likely futile. Half a globe removed from the West in Beijing, Chinese President Xi Jinping perceived hope where the West perceived crisis. In an off-the-record briefing, an advisor said, if the West loses Africa, China wins a continent. At 11:59 p.m., precisely 24 hours into its operation, Operation Baobab Tree was finished. 7 African nations had formally withdrawn from Western-led monetary systems, formed their own currency union, and entered mutual defense agreements. That night, President Ibrahim Traoré addressed the continent for the final time. Today, we showed that Africa does not need someone's permission to be great. We don't need someone's permission to control our own resources. And we don't need permission to determine our own destiny. The international response was immediate. Western media labeled the move as economic suicide. The IMF suspended all financial programs for the 7 nations. The World Bank froze ongoing development projects. France recalled its ambassadors. But then something changed. Looming over the continent, African nations began to receive attention. Nigeria called an emergency ECOWAS summit. Kenya initiated quiet negotiations on East Africa's monetary independence. South Africa began the study of an alternative to the Western banking system. Within a week, the African Union held a special summit on continental economic unification. Within a month, the new 7-member union concluded bilateral trade agreements with China, Russia, India, and Brazil. Their gold-backed currency, the African dinar, began to gain acceptance and popularity on global markets. Within 3 months, the bloc's cumulative GDP had soared, the most rapid African economic expansion in history. The Berlin Wall fell because people demanded freedom. The Soviet Union collapsed because its system disappointed them. But 7 African nations united because they had a decision to make. Dignity or dependence, sovereignty or subordination, and they made it within 24 hours. The world could only watch and take note. Today, Operation Baobab Tree is being studied in universities worldwide as one of the greatest and fastest economic transitions in the modern world's history. It is proof that African unity is not a fantasy, but a force in a position to reorganize the world order. The tree developed in 24 hours keeps on growing on a continent that has finally remembered its strength.